All right, guys. So obviously this evening, we're going to start talking about what's on everybody's mind, and that's going to be the NPRM. I'd like to kind of start off and open this up to any questions anybody has right off the get-go so that we can kind of address those as we go along.
There's a bunch of new people here. Maybe we should do a quick introduction.
Absolutely. So my name's Josh. I go by Cujo in the chat. I'm the vice president of the FPVFC. Dave?
This is Dave Messina. I'm president and CEO of FPVFC.
Hello, I'm Dan, and I'm the Technology and Regulations Director.
And David's in there. He's our.
Can you hear me?
Yep, we can now.
Little technical difficulty here. I'm David Wallace. I am the marketing director for the FPVFC.
All right. So I'd like to open it up to any questions anybody has on the NPRM. And, anything kind of goes. I want to address any issues anybody has from that standpoint in terms of understanding what's going on, or anything that we can help clarify. So I'm going to drop the same link that we posted on Facebook and we posted in Discord. That's going to link to our layman's guide for the NPRM. If you want, you can click in there and check that out. I see a lot of people are jumping in, which is perfect. So any questions on the NPRM that we can clarify right off the
How does this affect drones that are sold for non-hobbyist purposes?
So commercial drones?
Yes.
Okay, so it's going to affect all drones equally. So basically, each type of remote identification that they've proposed kind of dictates what the drone's going to be capable of doing. So at its most basic level, you have the UAS, or the drones without remote identification. And basically the gist of that is that if you have no remote ID, you will be restricted to an FAA recognized identification area, also called a FRIA. Now, a lot of these are going to be AMA sites. I would presume that they're going to be the leaders on applying for those. But those are only going to be, under the current regulation or the current proposal, those are only going to be able to be submitted for authorization for the first 12 months. After that, there will be no new created fixed flying sites or FRIAs. The next level up would be the limited remote ID. And what that basically entails is that you have remote ID in your, basically for your ground station, you have to be connected to the internet. And in order to actually even take off, you have to be connected to the internet and broadcasting the remote ID messaging. And then, but on that, you're going to be limited to a 400-foot radius dome. So you can fly basically 400 feet in one direction, 400 feet in the other direction, and 400 feet vertically. So that gives you a total area of 800 feet across and 400 feet up. Then even more so, standard remote identification, that's going to require the same thing as limited, where your ground station is connected to the internet and your drone actually is broadcasting through radio frequency its position. Both of them have to send the same messages, and those messages would include the latitude, longitude of both the drone and the ground station. It would, the altitude of the drone, your altitude, your exact position, so on and so forth. Now, that is for any drone, commercial or recreational. The caveat here is that these drones need to be approved with the remote ID in them by the FAA. So they have to come from the manufacturer or the producer of these drones, and those producers need to be FAA certified with a remote ID. So
one of the nuances of the proposed rules is registration, and so as you look at these rules, the current recreational and commercial regulations apply. So if you see in the new proposal, there's a lot said about under 250 grams or under 0.55 pounds. You don't have to register it. Cool. Well, if you're flying commercial, of course you do. So just be aware of things like that.
Yeah. So, yep, absolutely. What other questions do we have?
So I don't think there's anything about classification of airspace anymore, right? So being in like middle of nowhere, Wisconsin, where it's unclassified, it doesn't really matter at this point with these regulations, right?
No, it does not matter. These regulations would go into effect no matter the class of airspace, no matter where you live. If you live out in the middle of the boonies, you live on top of the Rockies, doesn't matter. They are all equal. Now, the one thing that still is in effect is if you're going to fly in controlled airspace, you still would have to use LANT for approval and then abide by your authorization that you got there.
Right. This doesn't take anything away from regulations. It just adds more regulations.
Right.
What else? Okay. So has everybody here read through the proposals that the FPVFC is making on this? And I'll link those here too.
I do actually have a question, not so much on the regulations, but there's so many different live streams going on and different people talking about this and that, and outside of the fact that I thought the community was more mature than it is. As far as there's been a lot of talk about this might be illegal, so on and so forth. Is there anything that you guys have looked at within the regulations that you think could be potentially challenged in court?
So I think Drone U put out a live stream a couple of days ago, and they were looking at the potential for there to be a wiretapping law. I haven't had the time to actually.
Yeah, the surveillance.
Yeah, surveillance and wiretapping. So I haven't, but that's directly related to having to connect to the internet and give off your location. I haven't had time to dig into that just yet. That's on my plate, but I haven't actually physically done that yet. So it's a potential, but I don't know where that will lead.
Right. And I think some of the other things that I've seen is, hey, this is infringing on private property, and lots of people touting different case studies. But I think those kind of all lead down a dead end as well, at least from what I've gathered.
So, a lot of people are going to sit there and cite Cosby versus the U.S., and that has some merit, but at the same time it doesn't. It involves a taking, and where there was a physical damage to the well-being of his livestock, essentially based on these military overflights that were happening. Right. And there's a little bit of a difference there, but at the same time, could there be a case there? Maybe, but it's really pushing it.
Yeah, wouldn't there actually have to be damages already? I mean, so
exactly.
It kind of would. You would actually need this to go into effect, and then you could potentially mount a legal challenge based on what has happened. You can't really take anybody to court over what hasn't on speculation.
Exactly. So until something actually physically happens, and it could come down to somebody saying, I don't want a drone delivery from Amazon or something like that. They're damaging the calm of my animals or something like that, and Amazon still goes ahead and does a drone delivery, that could be, something that could lead down that path, but that's a whole lot of speculation.
Yeah, I'm sure they just implement something like a do not call list, like a do not drone deliver list.
Right. So, what other questions?
Would it be, well, I don't know if the FAA is smart enough to do this, but would it be possible for a remote ID to be like something that you solder to your existing drone or just add to it?
So,
Good question.
it's a great question. And under the current proposal, no, that's not going to be an option. So there is no path in the current proposal for amateur builders, which is basically what they're calling us, to add a component to make it remote ID compliant. They have basically put forth that a couple of conditions. So let's say Get FPV or Race Day Quads or whoever sends you, or they sell a kit that has all the parts, and it has to have every single part from every piece of wire to every motor to the XT60 connector on down the line. It also has to include instructions on how to build it. And you have to follow those instructions to the T. In that particular case, you could build one. It could be remote ID compliant, but that manufacturer, let's Race Day Quads, would have to make sure that, or basically would have to be approved by the FAA to manufacture remote ID. Now, there's a couple other ones. So let's say you were to go like we currently do. I go get on Get FPV and I piece together a quad. And I want this part, and I know a lot of people are flying that part, but I don't want that part. I want this part, and I piece together my own quad. That is not going to fly. You would be limited to, even if you could put a remote ID on there, you'd still be limited to a FRIA site, a fixed site. So there's a lot going on with that. What else we got?
So there's been some. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Not per se like a question, but I think because I was watching that Drone U, and I've been watching a lot of these live streams, that I've seen a couple of ideas that have come across my screen about, like, if the commercial drones had a way to ID themselves to us, we could roll that right into beta flight and there'd never be a problem.
In some fashion, that could be possible, but you're still going to have the technology on board your drone to detect. And then you're going to have the wherewithal to actually, you're going to have the wherewithal to actually avoid that drone, because 90% of us are going to be flying, actually 99% of us that fly FPV are going to be flying manual. So without some kind of automated process for detect and avoid, that doesn't really work. So
not really a detect and avoid, just enough. Like even in our phones, it could just use the existing LANC system to tell us that there's a drone coming within, let's say 1,000 feet of our current location. And your phone could ring and let you know that they're about to come into the bubble that you created on LANC. Because the problem with the remote ID is what Drone U said about the state and towns being able to tax us on landings and takeoffs. States and towns could even start taxing us on our drones. I mean, and it opens up a whole world of crap for us to have to deal with aside from even just this.
Yeah, I'm hopeful that detect and avoid is limited to beyond visual line of sight. And so I think as we look at the design of standard remote ID UAS and then limited remote ID UAS, is that I believe there was that the standard is, okay, we're going to use that as the starting point for beyond visual line of sight. And so then there are a number of technical as well as policy and practice hurdles that need to be overcome in order to do legal beyond visual line of sight. And detect and avoid is near the top of that list. So I think remote ID is the start, and then once they've got that figured out, then they can start working. All right, how are we going to integrate that into an unmanned traffic management system, and how do you utilize what's the appropriate and intelligent detect and avoid that you use?
Well, yeah, I mean, all of that is great for the unmanned. Yeah, I'm losing.
For the guy who's going well, for if you want to fly beyond visual line of sight. So our thought is we are pushing for a modified limited that would allow some level. We want things fuzzed up a little on beyond visual line of sight. For example, one of the classic examples is, if I'm flying if I'm standing on a bridge and there are no cars, nobody around, and I take my UAS underneath the bridge, I'm technically beyond visual line of sight, even though it could be 15 feet away from me. So we're trying to get that type of that's one of the things we're pushing for. And
So,
we're well,
go ahead.
one of the things we welcome, so please, what are we missing in the documents we're producing? And, we really do welcome if you guys think, no, that's a bad idea. Why don't you try putting forward as a recommendation the following? We really are very interested in those ideas.
Well, judging by, I mean, just the last thing I'm going to say, and then I'll keep listening. I mean, judging by the current status and current happenings that have come from the FAA, and I mean, maybe I might sound a little conspiracy theorist, but I mean, they released this proposal the day after Christmas. If that's not I'm just going to be frank here because I'm tired of being politically correct. If that's not a kick in the dick, I don't know what it is. They're not playing nice. They didn't listen to us at the DAC. They didn't listen to the DAC, and I believe it's come down to, like, even going through how complicated these rules are getting. The more we play into that, the more complicated it's going to get. And I really think our motives need to be shifted. Just like I just said on that live stream, that we need to find a way to get everybody together,
right,
versus complicating it more. And the only way everybody's going to come together is if it's simplified. Like, we need petitions against them. We need lawyers to help, obviously. I mean, there's a lot of money involved too. And I'm not just trying to throw money around, but we need to create an arrowhead, essentially. We need to create that whole pyramid from the community all the way up to just straight arrowhead right into them, because they are not playing nice with any of us.
I think you make a good point. It's certainly when we put weeks and weeks and weeks into the remote ID drone advisory committee work, and then the people who spent a year and a half on the aviation rule committee, and both of those significant pieces of work were ignored. And of course, the drone advisory committee pointed to a year and a half worth of work in the ASTM work group on remote ID and tracking. So, yeah, a lot of us are stinging pretty bad. Our current thinking is we really should try to get everyone moving in the same direction to align for the comment period that, of course, closes on March 2, and then and in the same period, what else can we be doing, as was mentioned, talking to congressional representatives, senators, and then what do we do after the comment period closes? How do we reach out and talk to and work with the FAA to try to move this in a positive direction? Those are some of the things that we're working on. It's probably not as Drew Camden was characterizing. I guess we're a little more conservative than he would like. He wants to be a little more aggressive.
Well, I mean, I would agree with his statement on that, but you can only be so aggressive before, it's just like backing an animal into a corner. You can only be so aggressive, and get somebody back into a corner before they just lash out and completely take us over. And that's where our problem lies, is that in 2018, the Reauthorization Act made it so that the administrator of the FAA can promulgate any rules they want. They're not going to listen to us at this comment period. That 2018 Reauthorization Act made that possible. The main things that I think need to be focused on for that is that we've given, underneath the sports medicine bill, we've given them that ultimate power that everybody that is, 20 years old and up has been taught not to give to a government entity. There's points that I've made to gun owners that this is the groundwork. This is going to be the groundwork that they're going to use in order to work onto guns. This is also like privacy laws. I mean, there's so many different things that are going to come from this that are going to just equal to bad things. And if we start using these things and start educating people, like I was talking to a guy today who was he was complaining about the corruption and whatnot, and of the government, and I told him about the proposal, and he almost lost his head. He almost lost his head because he doesn't want the delivery drones to go around. And that point that was made in the live stream about the fact that if we this proposal is going through whether we like it or not. We're not going to be flying after this becomes law. And 3 years after it, it's not going to happen unless we change it before then, unless we get the petitions and the lawyers, and because that giving them that kind of power is what they are abusing right. And it's only going to get worse.
Yeah, I can't disagree with much of what. No, I can't disagree with much of what you said, because 6 months ago we would have said, well, let's see what they come out with the remote ID. We're getting feedback and hints that they're accepting the input, and they didn't. And so now what's the different path we need to take? So
we can take a lot of tips from the gunfight.
Yeah.
Fight on weapons. We can take a lot of tips from that, because this fight is one and the same.
Yeah.
Well, it's become apparent to me that there's not going to be any coming together within the FPV community or the drone community, period. So,
well, we're not done. We're not done yet. I have not
even 30 days into this. Everybody's
I know,
going
but
to fight
just
right
judging
now,
from what I've seen so
with the
far.
with the vitriol.
I think it's. I really think it's a pipe dream. But so, has anyone reached out to other members of the DAC to get their take on it? Is there anybody else that's kind of in our ballpark? Because Drew wants us to be more aggressive, but we're also pragmatic in the sense that we know some form of this is coming, and so we're just trying to make it a feasible system that we can all work within, so that there is compliance. Somebody else on that drone advisory committee has got to be in the same boat that we can team up with.
Yes, is the short answer to your question, and we are finding allies and support in organizations that have surprised me, like AOPA, ALPA, organizations that are manned aircraft associations with aircraft manufacturers. So people who are explicitly outside of the drone industry are upset by this and supportive. And these are folks that I've met through the work that we're doing with the DAC tasking groups.
Good, because I honestly think, yes, we'll probably get everybody to make a comment, or they'll give their proxy to Bruce, whatever the case may be. But I really think it can be won in the trenches by making good partnerships with those individuals.
And what the benefit of those relationships are that these are people who've worked with the FAA for decades, and they're very helpful in offering us, this is the best way to approach the FAA, and we're taking and heeding that advice. That's one of the tips was that we should be, if we write a comment, make sure that it's personalized and unique. Don't do a copy and paste campaign.
Right, but also not a FU either. So
exactly, yeah. As Bruce Simpson I feel was absolutely right on the money when he described that we need to be professional, polite, and constructive. And and then to some of the other points, it's okay, that's for the comments in the comment period. What are we doing and what should we be doing subsequent to that? To or is it possible to sit down with some of the people writing the rules? How can we talk to them? Who else should we be talking to? We've got House and Senate subcommittees on space and aviation. What can we get them? Question on where's XJet? You mean right now or physically? Physically, he's in New Zealand. Where is he right now? It's
Oh, right.
Yeah, he tends to
let's
miss
see,
most of our meetings and then complains he forgot about it or we didn't notify him,
Well,
something like that.
he's
it's
dealing
what
with some personal issues with his
yes, he
wife. I
is.
mean, his daughter has stage 4
Yes, he
cancer,
is.
and yeah.
Say, Dave, do you want to
I'm
spend
inclined to cut him a break.
Absolutely.
you want to spend 1 minute and mention how the DAC and the ARC and the ASTM standards were surprised by what the FAA released?
Yeah, so one of the things that we've, through the work with the DAC, is we've had the privilege of meeting the people who worked on the Aviation Rule Committee that started, gosh, what was it, back in 2016, I think, finished up in 2018. And then the ASTM F-38 work group. That was a 1.5-year project, co-chaired by a guy in Intel and another fellow um, whose organization, Trivector, is the company he's currently working for. So these people had put in and worked closely with the FAA on these projects. The Aviation Rule Committee was chartered by the FAA, and the whole purpose of it was to come up with the start of remote ID. And then from June to October of 2019, the DAC was asked to put together recommendations on remote ID. So we pulled together the co-chairs of the ASTM work. We used a lot of that and used the technique of a reference standard. So we point to the ASTM standard, so there's consistency around the world. And so it was starting to line up with a number of sensible, simple structures for Here's Beyond. It was a mission and tiered structure, and that was what was put forward. And as you can see, that was really not, that was pretty much ignored. And so that's the frustration, certainly from us, and as well as the people who spent years volunteering their time to work on those standards and committees.
And those people that are frustrated also include DJI and Google with Wing and all kinds of other corporations. They're also frustrated with this.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's one of the points that really gets me is that there's the level of regulation to have the device power off that it can't take off unless there's an internet connection on the limited. That's really annoying. And you think about it, it's like, no, wait a second, that means I can't take this inside to a place that maybe it's a gymnasium, and it's certainly there's no FAA regulation, but all of a sudden maybe I'm inside and I can't get an internet connection because I'm inside, and so it won't take off. So it's things like that that are really maddening, so that we're trying to go through in detail and piece it together. Another area that we are working on is the assumptions and data resources. And so we've sent out a quick survey. There's no grandfathering in the NPRM because the assumption is that the average UAS owner owns 2 UAS and they have a lifespan of 3 years. And so certainly the number I have is a lot higher than that. And the price point that they cited for the average UAS is $114 US. So if you think about, why would you structure numbers like that? Because if the lifespan is short and there are not many of the devices and they're inexpensive, then the discounted cost of these devices over a brief period of time is a small number. So you can tell people that get over it. They can live with replacing these devices with new devices. So that's one of the things that we're working on, is get some data, respectfully, hey, the number that we have now is between 9 and 10 is the average number of FPV drones that people own, and the amount of time that that they can exist is a long time, because they really are much like our favorite axe. You can replace the handle or the head and keep flying. And that was to one of the points that we're putting forward. There was a question early on about, can I retrofit a transponder to one of these devices, and that we would like that's one in our recommendations. We're putting forward the idea of an electronic module that carries the serial number, so that we can bolt that onto an existing FPV drone, and then it's a field replaceable, so I can plug that in from device to device, and that then tails back to the registration requirement. So a lot of this is difficult because it's interdependent. Okay, I've been yammering on. Yeah, question, please.
Okay, yeah. So, what's the difference between standard and what's it called? The
Limited.
limited? Yeah.
Okay, and then there's the third category, the non-equipped. Josh, you want to do this one? I think you've got the definitions really well.
The easiest way to describe it is a standard will be required to connect to the internet and to broadcast. So basically, if you think about, let's break it down into two parts. You have your transmitter in your hand. That's your ground station. So the FAA uses the term ground station pretty prolifically through the document. So your transmitter is your ground station. So some part of that or your phone could act as your internet connection. So you'll have to be broadcasting all that information, all the messaging from takeoff to landing. Yep. Also, your drone will have to have a piece of equipment on it to basically broadcast over radio frequency. And that radio frequency, they want to basically be interfaceable with people's phones. So if you're flying your drone over my backyard, I can point my phone at your drone and be able to pull up all the info, and then I can call it in. But it'll also give me the location of where you are. Now, the difference between that and limited is limited only requires the ground station to connect to the internet. There is no broadcasting from the drone, and in fact, it's prohibited under limited. Standard grants you the ability to fly wherever.
As long as the 400-foot limit.
And as long as it's not in controlled airspace, you'd still have to get your LANS authorizations and whatnot. Limited would allow you to fly just about anywhere, but it would limit you to that 400-foot radius dome. Did that make sense?
Did to me. Did that answer the question?
So both standard and limited have to stay within 400 feet.
No.
Standard would be able to fly. The goal behind standard is going to be beyond visual line of sight. So standard, those are going to be the delivery drones, the hospital drones, the search and rescue drones, all that kind of stuff. Those are going to be the ones that are going to be likely to have the standard. Now, the ones that you might see come out of like companies like Get FPV or TBS or any number of these companies that are fully built units or fully kitted units are probably, if they're going to be anything, they're probably going to be limited. But again, it's kind of hard to call that at this point. I would presume that most people flying recreational, maximum they would have would be limited. Do you disagree with that, Dave?
I agree. I think that's correct. Because if you start, there are other elements and other costs that you're going to have to incur to kick up to the to fly. Why do I want a standard? I want a standard UAS so I can fly BVLOS. In order to fly BVLOS, there's probably other things I need to do to make that happen. Like a detect and avoid. So in the immediate time frame after this rule goes into place, if it goes into place as is, we would utilize the existing regulations of 107 and recreation, and then on top of that, we can anticipate beyond visual line of sight regulations.
All right, thank you.
Of course. All right, so we're about halfway through. I do want to kind of talk through our proposal a little bit. I'm not going to go massively into depth because literally we can get lost in the weeds on this really quickly.
And we have to talk about the knowledge test.
Yes, we do. So, couple of things that I'm going to kind of gloss over really quick is we did put in a request for shielded operations. Basically, that would fall under any operation that takes place in any airspace except over air traffic controlled airports. Those types of operations would not exceed an altitude of 50 feet over the tallest object within 100 lateral yards. So if you think about that, let's put that in layman's terms a little bit. You're flying in a park. The tallest object that you can possibly see around you, let's say it's the field lights for the soccer field. You would not be able to, you would be able to fly up to the height of those and 50 feet over to still fall within shielded operations. We are proposing that no remote ID would be necessary for that. We are asking for specific language for UAS under 250 grams to not be to not require remote ID. That is already in the proposal, but it's very vague, and we'd like to kind of lock that down. We do put forth a couple of things for UAS without remote ID. So, as an example, how many of you have used Lance before? Hopefully, quite a few of you, hopefully. If you have or you haven't, if you have, you just easily go into an app like Kitty Hawk or AirMap. You basically put in where you're flying at. It gives you authorization. Usually it pops up pretty quick. We're basically asking for the same thing for our drones that are not equipped with remote ID. Instead, you'd basically draw a polygon on the map where you're going to be flying. You'd put your FAA registration number in, maybe a time frame, and your phone number. With that, people, FAA would know, hey, there's a person flying here. They could post that stuff to the remote USSs, which are the UTMs, the unmanned traffic management systems, and everybody that would be possibly flying a drone, a manned aircraft, anything, could get a notification that says, hey, there's a guy flying here. It doesn't have any personalized information beyond your FAA registration ID, and a phone number to contact you just in case something happens. So for an example, let's say a fire breaks out and they need to bring in a bunch of fire trucks and whatnot. We all know you're not supposed to be flying over the scene of an emergency, so they quickly text you, send you a call, send you a notification that says, hey, there's a fire, please land your UAS. Pretty easy. Any questions on that? Because I want to kind of clarify that, if there are.
Was the Lance proposal in front of the FAA prior to the draft of being released?
This actual, what I'm asking you, or what we're asking for?
Yeah, I thought that was proposed
It
prior
was.
to the rulemaking in the fall.
It sure was. It actually was proposed by the DAC. A very basic request was proposed to the FAA before this rulemaking. Yes.
So I guess what's the differentiator now, and is the AMA in support of these? What we're asking? I mean, have we coordinated with them? Are they like, yeah, it seems reasonable? Because they have a seat at the table.
They do have a seat at the table. On the flip side of that, based on the the AMA's responses to what the NPRM is, it's not something they're interested in. It seems like they are interested in maintaining their flying fields, being able to fly in their backyards without a 400-foot radius. They don't want to register every UAS. And I think there's one more, but it has nothing to do with negating remote ID. So, I will say that we have partnered with them in terms of giving them information, stuff that we're working on. But the partnership hasn't quite been equal. So, I'd be happy to sit down at a table with them and discuss this stuff. I know this stuff has been pretty shared out across the Facebook groups. I'm sure somebody's gotten this. I think our proposal has been shared 57 times off our Facebook page to any number of Facebook sites that I can't even track down. So, it's in the hands of a lot of people, and hopefully we can have a conversation about it. But unfortunately, right now, it doesn't seem like the interest is there from that standpoint.
So is the strategy to kind of come together from our side of the table, I guess, and come to the FAA with this
proposal
in this proposal in numbers, and
absolutely
that breaks through. That's it's not like the AMA is against it. It's just they're not for it either. They're just doing their own thing. And
exactly. So yeah, the basically what we've been over the last couple of days, probably last week, trying to do is gather as many voices as we can. So Dave and I did a Bardwell interview. We've done some conversing with some other parties. We've talked to companies. We've talked to other communities, both FPV and not FPV, all who have issues with this NPRM. And through that, the goal is, yes, to pull the community together as tightly as we can and circle the wagons and speak with a voice that says, hey, we're concerned, and these are some great proposals. Let's start looking at this stuff. But like Steve was saying earlier, I think right now a lot of it, to kind of come back to what Steve was saying, is that yes, there's a lot of divisiveness in the community right now, and for a lot of different reasons. And I think a lot of that is stemming from the fact that people are worried and they don't know who to point the finger at. Not that they necessarily need to, but some people feel they need to point the finger at somebody. And we're trying to work through that and past that so that we can kind of get to the point where we're kind of talking the same language. I think it was Dan that posted the 7 stages of grief, or the 9 stages of grief, or whatever it was, Dan.
Yeah. Yep. 7, I think.
We need to get to the acceptance and work through it phase pretty quick. Anyway, any other questions on the no or UAS without remote ID? I just want to make sure that's clear. Does that seem like it's a burden to do, to pull up an app and draw a polygon on a map?
Isn't that already implemented? Because I know every time I fly, I contact my Air Force, the watchtowers, and I tell them where I'm going to be flying, when I'm going to be flying, and how high I'm going to be flying. So doesn't that just already do what we're already supposed to do?
So that's an interesting question. So a lot of times that stuff is supposed to be taken care of through LANs, and that's when you're operating in controlled airspace. That doesn't necessarily give them.
And
Go ahead, Dave.
We are no longer supposed to call air traffic control, air traffic management, and they are not supposed to take our calls. So this was shifted for recreational on July 13 of this past year.
Can I add something to that?
Please.
Absolutely.
All right. So I live in a Class D airspace, and they just started allowing you to outside of Lance request a waiver for flying in controlled airspace. I happen to get one. Since it is a Class D and it is related to a DoD facility, I still have to call the tower.
Oh, I'll be darned. Okay, that's
and that was
exception. Thank you for the clarification. And I assume that since you're getting a waiver, you're a 107 operator.
No, this is recreation. You can actually go to their drone website and file a waiver request.
So that is true. Yeah, that is very true. So if your airport or facility that is in controlled airspace is not on LANCE, you can go to the drone zone and request a waiver. Sometimes how long has it taken you? I'm curious because I've never had to do that.
It took less than a week.
Okay. So you got to be able to plan ahead a little bit in order to do that, but it is possible.
Well, it's good. It's good for 2 years.
Oh, really?
They actually extended it beyond the time frame I wanted.
It's like a
co-op.
co-op.
That's perfect.
Jeez.
That's really awesome. Okay. So good information.
And I'd called the tower because they put in the paperwork the number I'm specifically supposed to call, and I called, and the tower manager, got pretty upset with me. So I called the 1-800 number from the FAA website, and they went out of their way. They actually called the tower manager and talked to him about it and said, this specific person is allowed to call you and has to tell you because you're a DoD facility, and we want to make sure, like, if Marine One shows up in your airspace, you need to call him and tell him get up.
Wow. Good for you for persevering, and good for the FAA team to follow up.
Yep, that's really
good. I was surprised because they called me back and left a couple messages until they actually got me to answer.
Darn.
I know, right?
See, now if you had remote ID, no, I'm only kidding. Just a little joke.
So, all right. So I'm going to move on. One of the things that the next things would be kind of a blending of standard and limited, and this would basically allow us the proposal that we're asking for is that we are capable of taking a component that is a FAA approved and retrofitting it to any existing UAS to satisfy remote ID. So through that, we kind of go through what the component would need in order to be successful with that. So it would need to have a serial number, a lot of the same things that they're asking for in their proposal, but restricted to just that RID component. So it have to have a serial number. It should be resistant to tampering, so you can't spoof it or change the data that it's reporting. But key would be able to be swapped from one UAS to another, or one drone to another. Yeah. So I could pop it off. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say all data can be spoofed and or modified. You're going to make it as resistant as possible, but
exactly,
I guarantee that it will be cracked at some point.
This thing that they get hung up, and this is a question you maybe can help me understand, is they get hung up on the concept of your build has to be approved for it to be legal.
Right.
Trying to not allow for illegal builds. And we get into that constantly, like, guys, criminals don't follow laws, so it doesn't matter what law you make to try to inherit it, they're just not going to follow it,
Right.
So I'm real fuzzy on what I don't, and people are making regulations behind that. They're doing their best they can, but they're not drone pilots. They're not pilots. Period. Most of the time, they have different degrees and things, but. Do you have? Is there any way to break through that? It's inherent across all regulations to some extent.
Well, I think this is kind of where, I think it was just Josh was kind of talking about the gun regulations, and well, I don't want to get into a gun topic. There are some similarities in which. Criminals, you can outlaw certain things. You can outlaw assault rifles. You can outlaw drones without remote ID, but criminals are not going to comply with that kind of stuff. And I think we've been having that conversation for decades. and we still haven't broken through that yet. So I think that a lot of people, a lot of legislators, and a lot of people making these regulations think that, oh, this will fix everything, but it's not a cure-all. The people that are going to follow the regulations are going to be the law-abiding citizens.
And one of the, when we look at the document and it says, well, we think that a very high percentage of the existing fleet of UAS can be software upgradable to comply with all of these new rules. And of course, our collective heads hit the desk, because the answer is zero. No, the best DJI systems cannot be software upgraded to be compliant. And certainly none of the FPV drones that we fly can be software upgraded. So we're looking carefully at the assumptions in terms of what did they create to base their rationale on. Why did they think this was a viable set of rules? And we don't see a lot of logic in the foundational assumptions, and we're going after those as well.
Absolutely.
What is the stumbling block that we don't think, like a transponder can be mounted to a racing drone? What is it the avoid and detect? It's not the transponder part.
So
we might
there's
not like the weight. You might not like the signal, but it can be put on.
Yeah, it can. And there's no talk in the document about avoid or detect and avoid. That conversation hasn't even started yet. I happen to think that's going to be, more in tune with the BVLOS or beyond visual line of sight conversation. But, in terms of this, I think I don't understand why they wouldn't allow for a retrofit. It doesn't make sense. And I mean, the way we've proposed it here, you have a serial number on the retrofit component. It's resistant to tampering, despite, it's resistant to tampering, and we're just going to leave it at that.
Well, it's the point of, if you want to tamper, if you're a person that wants to tamper with it, you just won't put it on to begin with, and you're a criminal at that point. And you're just going to do whatever you want, no matter what the rule is. So it doesn't really matter.
Yeah,
I think the FAA is trying to make it as hard as possible that you can't tamper with it, because it's built into the functionality of the drone.
Yeah, I mean, there's a differentiation between, I guess, the criminal activity versus, look, I'm going to just hack this thing and remove my geofencing, which, sure, that could be considered criminal activity per se, but I think we got to differentiate that. So tamper-proof, I think, you know what I mean?
Well,
yeah, there's gradations in between, right?
There are, and I specifically, when I wrote this, I specifically did not say tamper-proof. I said resistant to tampering, because nothing's tamper-proof. We all know that. If you have the tools, and if it can be built, it can be reverse engineered, and it can be tampered with. So it's pretty cut and dry. I think some of the parts in the NPRM proposal from the FAA that make it a little more difficult is they want to be able to not allow the drone to take off if it's not connected properly.
Right.
That's where the FAA and a retrofit component differ greatly, because it's not going to have that kind of control. At most, you'd hook in your GPS, if you have one, to it, and from that point on, it has a barometer built in, and it starts broadcasting in whatever frequency it needs to broadcast. The FAA is looking for that to broadcast in cell phone compatible bands. So a lot of that kind of centers around Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. Well, those don't have the range. There are some long-range Bluetooth 5.0, but I'm skeptical at best at what the range is on that. So, there are some differences, but in order to be able to retrofit the entire existing fleet of UAS in the national airspace, they have to have a component that we can add. Otherwise, we're all just gonna, if you want to be compliant, you're just gonna toss your drone in the trash, or you're gonna go fly at a fixed flying site. But the problem is that these companies, that work professional and commercial jobs. Think about all the the cinematic drones that they use for creating TV shows and movies. Think about the ag drones, the agricultural drones, the mapping drones, all these other
so does it have to include
UAS.
the red camera when you buy it? And
What's
then
that?
does it have to include the red camera when you buy it and remote ID? If you detach the red camera, is it no longer compliant?
Right. It's all these people have all these very sophisticated, very expensive drones that can't be retrofit, and they're just garbage, and they can't do business with them. And that's a bad deal all around. So, in some regards, we can sit here and say commercial's the problem. Commercial wants to do delivery. Commercial is using the DJIs and the Uniques and all these other guys. But at the same time, they're getting hit just as hard on this as we are. And it's time for not just the FPV or recreational or model aircraft community to band together, but UAS pilots all together need to come together on this.
Yeah, along those lines, I saw a comment a little while ago talking about FPV racers, and the comment I think was something along the lines of, well, they don't need remote ID. And true, no need to get into that point, but we are reaching out to try to talk to the racing organizations because they have a great reach, and we know these are people who fly FPV, and many of them can post comments to the FAA, and they're organized in the sense that they usually belong to a local club. So they have already a way to communicate with each other. So we're trying to tap into that and share everything that we've created, all the materials that we've got. So one more community, and if anyone thinks of other groups, please let us know. Josh, shall I mention the knowledge test?
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't even see the time, Dave. I'm sorry.
I have one last question.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay, so you were talking earlier about drones that are used for business, like cinematography and agricultural. What are the chances that those companies would get approval for remote ID, a standard? Is it just speculated that larger corporations will be approved for it? Or?
I personally would imagine that the bigger companies that are making these drones, and I'm gonna kind of easily point at DJI here because they're one of the biggest. They're probably have the best and most resources, are gonna probably be capable of making that transition a little quicker than others. Now, that's not to say that smaller companies there's a lot of very specific like agricultural fixed wings that people use that eventually those companies would be able to kind of come around. Now, it also may come down to companies that are producing the remote ID technology license that technology out to other manufacturers and by proxy kind of get that approval. But who's to say? We don't know. Chances are that the people making the professional grade equipment are going to get that approval first, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
One thing in addition to the being able to retrofit, I do think you should make clear that what I would not want on the table is having to send a drone off to a service center to be retrofitted. This should be something that can be installed by
Agreed.
myself.
Yeah. Agreed.
Absolutely. Honestly, it needs to be able to be powered off the FC, maybe take up a UART and move on with life, And personally, if it were me and it was a component that I was going to have, I'd buy one, maybe two, but probably one. And I just put little pigtail plugs for that part and just plug it in, zip tie it down, and move on with my life.
Move it along like you do the GoPro. So, yep.
Yeah, the tricky part is won't let you take off unless it's connected to the internet. I've been racking my brain on that.
Yeah.
With
and
open source software, we can add modules, we can add code, but no matter, you can add closed source modules to the code, but then it's still open source firmware. I don't know how you overcome that without.
And that's the
closed source
thing
firmware.
and in our proposal, we're not recommending that. We're just recommending, a retrofit component, and that's what it exists. It doesn't hamper the UAS. It doesn't do anything except just broadcast that message.
So
Yeah, because it's people.
to
The
interject,
masses, to me, it's trying to break through with the FAA that we're trying to get the masses of drones that are just going to that are sold at Best Buy to be more safe for people that are lay and not, addicted to the hobby like we all are. And then,
absolutely.
And then a path for folks like us on this call that want to follow the law and not be worried about it, and will go out of our way to do that. And I think that's most people. It's just we need a path. And if we don't have a path, people are just going to do it illegally.
Exactly.
That's the thing. You're gonna. I was saying the same. It's almost going to be like prohibition.
Right. Unreasonable regulations will. Right. Unreasonable regulations will force large-scale non-compliance. We believe that firmly.
Yeah.
Yep.
So,
other questions?
Yeah. Quick question. So let's assume for a second that we get the retrofit component approved, and I can take my existing, say, 500-gram 5-inch quad and put a transponder on it, and then let's say I have GPS on my quad, and it actually knows exactly where it is and how fast it's going, and it sends that information to the FAA. I'm doing flips and all kinds of crazy stuff and moving around real fast. Do we have some kind of path to say if we give them that information, they're not going to come down later and say, that's reckless flying, that's got to stop? Because there's a big difference between flying surveillance with a fixed wing or a traditional, like DJI product, and FPV racing and freestyle. That's not.
Well, the FAA should not even have the ability to judge a safe flight versus an unsafe flight.
They don't know the specifics. And here's the thing is, I could be doing, let's say you were doing all those flips and tricks and whatnot in the middle of downtown New York, which number one would be a bad idea anyway, but with all those people, all those cars, all those whatever, versus doing all those same tricks out in the middle of nowhere. They don't know how to judge specifics. I could be in a park with a lot of people. I could be in a park with no people. It just, they're not going to have enough information to be able to judge that. Now, where that's going to come back on you is, let's say you go flying and you intrude on the airspace of a forest fire. Then they're going to be like, well, you passed into this airspace during a forest fire. You shouldn't be flying there. Let's have a chat. That's kind of where that information would kind of spool out, I think. Dave, do you disagree with that?
I don't. I was responding to a written text.
So, I don't.
But if that's the purpose, a polygon is clearly sufficient.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
I mean, you're not giving them any information. And I mean, you're giving them the information of, this is my flying zone. This is where I'm going to be for the next hour. And your drone itself, let's say you do have remote ID on there. All that's doing, it's not connecting to the internet. There's no information going anywhere. It's broadcasting via radio frequency in its local area. So maybe it has half a mile radius.
Why do I need a transponder if my drone already sends telemetry? They could totally pick that out as is, right?
Say one more time. I'm sorry.
So if your drone has the telemetry capability, you can snoop on the ISM band and pick up the telemetry.
You can, but
it's not as high power. I'll agree with you there.
Yeah, you can, but the problem lies in that the FAA wants local law enforcement and other enforcement personnel to be able to pick up that information with commonly acquired technology and as easy as possible, and they want it to connect to a smart device.
And they're trying to appease the public and say that they can use their cell phones also to watch what's flying in their neighborhood.
Local law enforcement enforcing FAA regulations is actually against the original motives of the FAA. The original motives of the FAA is that they had their FRAs to enforce their air laws, and local and state police. It even still states it in the law today that FRAs enforce the air, and the local and state cannot do that.
No, but what can happen here, guys, in terms of enforcement is that, let's say a police officer notices you doing something, somebody calls and complains, they can cite you for something simple like disturbing the peace. Then they can take your information, your drone's now evidence in that issue, and they can forward that over to the LEAP program, which is the Law Enforcement Assistance Program of the FAA. They have a whole section of their website dedicated to it. That's when it becomes the FAA's issue.
Well, that's cute.
So, yeah, exactly. It is cute, isn't it? So, yes, local law enforcement can get you in trouble with the FAA. It's just a roundabout process. Now, it does come down to the fact that is local law enforcement going to care? That's going to differ on a locality to locality basis. Some areas may care, others may not. It really just depends, and it's going to be like playing Russian roulette to figure out who does care. And that's part of the problem. So
I had a comment with the rules that are proposed. I don't see any mention of FPV at all. Like it's like FPV doesn't exist.
Right. So it defaults back to the current recreational exceptions.
And then on top of that, I think that all the rules are kind of like for freeway rules for big trucks. It's for the delivery drones.
No, it's not for the delivery. Explicitly, it's not for delivery drones. That's a different certification, Part 135, if I'm not mistaken. Someone on the Discord can correct me if I've got the number wrong.
It just seems like overkill for. It's kind of like, my thought was, if you compared it to bicycles versus cars or on the freeway, bikes can ride alongside cars on city streets, but we don't need bright headlights. We don't need.
Right. I think the standard remote ID UAS makes sense if you have in mind, okay, this is going to be beyond visual line of sight, and that's what I really want to do. I want to go out and do long distance. Okay, got it. And I would agree with you completely that then the limited and the non-equipped are just, they make my head explode. They're big time overreach.
Yeah, because if you look at the most innovative companies, not just in FPV, but things like the Skydio drone, you take your mountain bike out, it follows you around. There needs to be some exception for people who are just using, these are like riding a bike or a scooter or a moped or a motocross bike off-road or things like that. It's not really, there shouldn't be any need for any of that,
Yeah, that becomes a full remote system. That's no longer you controlling it.
Yeah, it becomes autonomous.
Fully autonomous, right?
Well, that would be covered under your shielded proposal, correct?
Yes,
like
actually, it would.
Follow drone.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
So would we need under the way it's proposed right now, you still need legally you need a spotter.
Yep.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, I think I can see better with my goggles.
We're laughing because we wrote that into the proposal and we've caught a little bit of gas about it, but
we
agree. Yep.
About halfway down on page 5, we do talk about FPV equipped UAS and being able to see better and yada yada yada.
Yeah.
So it's there. It's there. XJet Bruce put out a great video a while back on that exact topic. So check that out. It was a great video.
Thanks.
Since you invoked, is there any coordination? He's trying, he's surmounting an effort on his own.
Are we talking to Bruce? Is that what you're asking?
Yes.
Yes, we are.
He's on mute.
Yeah, he's on this. He's on this call. We are. We're absolutely talking to Bruce and supporting what he's doing, and and we are very grateful to his support and mentions of FPVFC.
Yes, we all are working on this. Dave, do you want to do? I'm sorry, I took all your time.
No problem. So when I used to sell structural analysis software, the 3D modeling guys always gave me about 2 minutes to talk about structural analysis. So I feel very, very comfortable in this position.
Here's your 2 minutes.
Exactly. So in addition to working on the remote ID NPRM, as some of you may recall, way back in November, December timeframe, the FAA announced that 12 companies were awarded the privilege of providing requirements for the ideas for administration of the UAS recreational test. So this happened. So we get together in Washington, D.C. Next Tuesday, and so I'll be there. And Dan and I have worked on the proposal on the RFI that we were. That's why we were awarded as one of the 12, and they have a bunch of questions. Now, so what's interesting is the FAA has parsed this so that what we will be talking about is the administration of the test and not the test, not the content, not the questions. And so we keep asking about the questions because we're saying, it's tough to do the administration if you don't know what the content of the question is. But the good news is we'll be there with a number of peers. One of the questions was, are we talking to Horizon Hobbies? Horizon Hobbies is one of the companies that are there. So a couple of companies that we have not yet spoken with will be in the room, and I will hope to capture them and talk to them about remote ID when we're there. But I will probably post the document that I'm looking at, which is all of these detailed questions about the administration of the test and our answers, our proposed answers to the FAA. It's going to be a walkthrough of a series of questions, an all-day meeting to do this, and it had to be face-to-face. So I'm flying down to DC to provide our responses, and as always, the benefit to us is that we're meeting people not only in the FAA, which is valuable, but also our colleagues who are in the same boat we are, and that's probably more than anyone really wanted to know about the the knowledge test. We don't think it'll be difficult, but as soon as we are able to say anything, we'll describe what the content is. Oh, and they want us to be, the objective back in 2018 was that a CBO would administer the test. So we continue to work toward becoming a CBO, and that's why we are a 501c3. That was one of the requirements. That's why we have safety guidelines published. So we're working in that direction.
The nice thing about being recognized for the knowledge exam is that I'm sure the FAA has done their respective due diligence on the FPVFC. So, having those safety guidelines, having the resources on the website, having all that information out there, I'm sure helped us get that, as well as the great work that Dave and Dan put into that RFI, the request for information on that. So we are hoping that we do get to facilitate that test, and if necessary, and hosting a lot of the educational material on our website and whatnot, and making that as accessible as possible. So any last questions that I can answer on the NPRM? Any last concerns, comments, anything?
So on the previous live stream, Drew, and I hate to throw anybody under the bus, but he's promoting a potential bill.
Yeah, it's a Senate bill that was introduced by Senator Mike Lee of Utah back in October of 2019. I looked into it, and it's gone through 1% of the process, and Senator Lee is a Republican, and that's important because Majority Leader McConnell is the one who would be bringing that to the floor if it got out of committee. Senator Lee is on the subcommittee for space and aviation. We've asked around, and we understand that Senator Lee, along with Senator Feinstein, introduced an almost identical bill in 2017, and that one did not get anywhere either. And so the advice I was given so far is it's a distraction. It's not going anywhere. And these are from people who are pretty well tied into the DC area. If anyone wants, we can post. It's 27 pages. We've got the PDF of the bill, and it is. I don't think it's gotten out of conference yet.
So basically, you're not going to be pursuing that. And my whole thing is, based on the way that Drew talked about it, it kind of has an underlying premise of I'll fly here until someone tells me I can't.
Well,
and I don't think that's
there's some gotchas in the bill and so I don't know if anyone here was also following what was going on with the uniform tort work across the country, which happily, in my view, has been set aside for a couple of years until remote ID and other regulations are settled down. Similar to the tort work, the Senate bill that Senator Lee has put forward allows local municipalities, local and state, to establish the laws that they want to manage and control the property, of course, but the airspace up to 200 feet. Now, there are some tantalizing shielded operations descriptions in there, but when a local municipality has the ability to manage the airspace up to 200 feet, and explicitly one of the things they're putting in this bill is you need to gain the permission of the landowner to do a flyover. If you're flying under 200 feet. And so immediately, I'm in the state of New York, so one of the most highly taxed states in the country. So I worry about, oh my gosh, if a local municipality got a hold of this, they'll be delighted to have drones land and take off in their parks for just a small fee. And then, as we tie into remote ID, it's like, oh my gosh, and then they're going to get a hold of remote ID information. This is just, this is too much. So
yeah, I agree.
Those are some of the reasons why my recommendation is for our team to not pursue it. And if anyone reads through it and says no, you guys should really look at this further, we're very interested in listening and having that discussion. We did look into it, but it's not something that that we feel we should pursue.
Any other questions, comments, concerns?
What are the action items you need from, what help do you guys need?
Biggest.
What a great close.
It is a great close.
Call to action. Always an end.
Absolutely. Yeah. So the biggest thing right now, guys, is to go through our talking points and poke holes in it. Really give it the once, the twice, the third over. Let us know what needs to be fixed. Let us know what we missed. Let us know where, maybe we overreached a little bit. Those are the kinds of things we need to know so that we can put out a solid, full bore set of talking points that people can use to write their responses. Even more so than that, make sure and not copy and paste either our response or anybody else's, because the FAA, we have heard that they use software that goes through, compares everything, and a copy and paste will not do anybody any good. So if there's 100 or 1,000 comments that all say the same thing, all those will count as one if it's all just copy and paste.
And
Okay, so that's key.
the other piece, as you're thinking about your own submission, and it would take a couple of minutes, is a brief personal story about what's the benefit of FPV and what's the impact that these regulations would have.
And even further than that is how drones have impacted your life, how flying FPV has impacted your life.
Right.
There are plenty of people out there that have stories to tell, and those stories are going to be the ones that are going to make a difference. So those are going to be key. But right now, for the immediate, next week, 2 weeks, let's beat up on our proposal, and we don't take offense. I will, and Dave will, and Dan will all take all your considerations into and look at it on its merit and figure out, is this something we need to add? Is this something we need to take out? Do we need to patch this up? Because that's going to be key. So yeah, that's the immediate. And then as we get closer to March 2nd, start writing your responses, start making them well thought out. If you want, and Drew asked this on Facebook yesterday, if you want to write one response on one topic, do it, and then write a second response on a different topic. Nobody wants to read a 5 or 10 page dissertation. And by the time they get through the whole thing, they're going to be bored to tears. And so if you want to break it up, you can leave more than one comment. If you don't get your comment right, go back in and fix it. Write them again. There's no restrictions on the number of comments that you can leave. And I am going to wrap this up. Hang on one second. If you've got more questions, now's the time to answer them, because I'm going to close this out here pretty quick.
So one thing to think about is working with Bruce to get a message out on like the direction over the next month or two, over the next month and a half.
Right.
On, hey, this is out there. Please comment. Hey, where your story. One thing that comes to mind is you hear a lot of stories in FPV where, in some cases, people will say like save them because of, it's an addicting hobby. So you have an addicting personality, and it gave them a good, productive way to use that. But those are the stories that I think can propose a
I heard a great
compelling
phrase
thing
today.
and to get that message out there.
FPV is the antidote to the addicted gamer. Yeah, things like that. Right. Yeah, when gaming turns into something that's unhealthy.
Well, they just put gaming up on the disability list for Social Security disability.
Oh, Jesus.
Well, but to use that microphone of Bruce's channel to talk about that kind of stuff, because not everybody might not be thinking about that. So that's some input that I was for you guys.
Does anybody want to get on a game of StarCraft?
Oh, you guys are awesome.
I love it.
That's funny.
Love it.
Okay. All right, guys. At the time of this meeting, there are. Hang on, I'm going to click on it. Right now, the front page says 4,011, but if you go into them, usually there's more. It actually says less. Right now, 4,011 comments. Another page says 3,942, so they're pretty close. But guys, there's
omitting as many as they were before, because the first day after it was up there, and they had that little excerpt on the side that says that they can omit any comments that they find, and all that stuff that it says right there. I saw out of the 40 or 50 comments that were up there at that point in time, out of the 180, there was at least 20 of them were the same guy saying the same exact thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think TextJet, who's in our chat there, discovered that they only update that number. Is it once a day or something like that? So it's not like a live number of how many comments there are.
Yeah, as of 11:59 p.m. yesterday. So, but at any rate, guys, keep in mind there's no rush to respond immediately. Take some time. if you're going to use our talking points, which I highly recommend so that we're all kind of speaking with one voice, let it kind of sit for a week or two until it starts to form concrete here, and then use those talking points to put together your response.
And I would say it's the public, well, the awareness of this is sort of going to diminish over the next few weeks, and we're going to want a huge push in the end of February to make sure everybody did get their comments in and didn't forget about this.
Absolutely. So, but yeah, take some time and make it personal and make it professional, and share what it is to you and the direction that we need to go. All right. So with that, thank you all for attending. This is probably one of our biggest meetings yet.
Do we have a schedule for when the next one will be?
I think we're going to do 2 weeks from today. So we'll be looking at, and I'll post it on the Facebook. 22, yeah, the 22nd of January. All right, guys? If you have any questions on this stuff, don't hesitate to reach out. We've been on this pretty much for a week and a half straight. And, we know it pretty forwards and backwards by this point. So if you have a question, there's no stupid questions, and we'll try and get you an answer if we don't know the answer. All right, guys?
Sounds
Have a good night.